Have you ever been so close to something you've worked for? So close you could almost taste it, yet all you felt was exhaustion? Maybe that's why you clicked on this story. Because you're standing at the edge of something bigger than yourself, but the weight of waiting feels heavier than the dream itself. I know what it means to whisper late at night. Maybe I should just stop trying. I've been there, sitting in the quiet with my own unfinished goals, questioning if all the sacrifice was ever worth it. But here's what I need to tell you right from the start. Your breakthrough is closer. Don't give up now. You may not feel it, you may not see it, but sometimes the darkest nights happen right before the first light begins to stretch across the sky. That's where my story begins, with one of those nights. It was past midnight, and the only light in the room came from the dull glow of my laptop screen. My desk was cluttered, half-empty coffee cup, unopened planner, bills stacked in a corner I tried not to look at. The cursor blinked on the screen, mocking me with its rhythm, waiting for me to type something brilliant, something that would finally launch me out of mediocrity into the life I had been chasing. But nothing came. Just silence. Just that blinking line. I stared at the gym bag in the corner, still zipped, shoes untouched. I'd promised myself I'd get up earlier, train harder, eat better, become the person who didn't just dream of health and success, but lived it. Yet here I was, exhausted before I even began. I thought of my family, the future I wanted for them, not just survival, not just middle-class pay-the-bills life. I wanted more. I wanted to give them a life where vacations weren't luxuries, where we could breathe without the constant pressure of barely enough. I wanted health strong enough to run with my kids, wealth steady enough to never check the bank balance before buying groceries, a home filled with laughter and peace instead of stress. But in that moment, all of it felt like a cruel mirage, a dream too far, a mountain too steep, and I sat there whispering, what if I never get there? What if this is all I'll ever be? Every sacrifice came flooding back. The nights I stayed in while others went out. The early mornings that bled into long days, the rejection emails, the ignored phone calls when I reached out for support, the times people told me, maybe this isn't for you, maybe you should just be realistic. Realistic. That word cut me deeper than any insult. Realistic meant settle. Realistic meant stay average. Realistic meant stop reaching for more. I closed my eyes and suddenly I saw flashes of the before. Before I started this journey, back when I believed anything was possible, back when I had energy in my bones and fire in my heart. I remembered that version of me, the one who wasn't afraid to dream, the one who believed that one day success would be mine. Where had that person gone? And in the silence of that night, shame crept in. Shame that I wasn't where I thought I'd be. Shame that my family looked at me and probably wondered if I'd ever deliver on the promises I had whispered in their ears. Shame that I was still standing in the middle of a journey that seemed endless, with nothing to show for it. Why keep going? I muttered under my breath. Why keep pushing when nothing changes? That's when the whisper came. Not from me, not from my thoughts. It was quieter, deeper, yet somehow sharper than my own voice. Do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. I froze. My chest tightened. My mind resisted. Because I didn't want scripture. I wanted solutions. I didn't want promises. I wanted proof. I didn't want whispers. I wanted results. But the words wouldn't leave me. They pressed against me like hands on my shoulders, steadying me, holding me up when I wanted to collapse. Still, I pushed back. But how much longer? How many more nights like this? How many more failures before that proper time comes? Silence. Just silence. And yet I couldn't shake the sense that someone was listening, that someone wasn't letting me go. I looked again at that blinking cursor, that mocking reminder of where I wasn't yet, but this time it didn't feel like mockery. It felt like a challenge, a question, almost as if God himself was asking, will you quit here when you're closer than you think? I didn't have the answer, not then. All I had was the ache of the moment and the weight of the choice in front of me. Because the truth is, when you're in the abyss, you don't see ladders. You don't see exits. You don't see light. You only feel the walls closing in. And that's where I was, caught between despair and destiny, unsure which one would claim me. But here's the part I need you to lean in for. What happened next wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't random. It was something so precise, so unexpected, that it shattered the silence I thought would never end. And that's where key point 2 begins. Have you ever had a memory surface at exactly the wrong moment, or maybe exactly the right one? 3 days after that night at my desk, I was standing in line at the grocery store, numb and on autopilot, when I saw something that shouldn't have mattered. A father with his young son. Nothing special, nothing dramatic, but the way that boy looked at his dad. Suddenly I was 7 years old again, and everything I thought I'd forgotten came flooding back. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. The scanner beeped its mechanical rhythm. Everything was normal, mundane, except I couldn't breathe. That little boy, maybe 5, maybe 6, was holding his father's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like safety lived in those fingers. Like trust was as simple as reaching up and knowing someone would reach back. My cart sat abandoned as I stumbled toward the exit. The automatic doors couldn't open fast enough. The parking lot air hit my lungs, but it wasn't enough. I sat on the curb, head between my knees, as a memory I'd buried for 23 years clawed its way to the surface. Daddy, will you teach me to ride my bike? Not today, son. Daddy's tired. But you promised. I said, not today. It wasn't the words. It was the way he couldn't look at me when he said them. The way his hands shook just slightly around his coffee mug. The way my mother stood in the doorway, silent, her eyes saying everything her mouth wouldn't. That was 3 weeks before he left. 3 weeks before Daddy's tired became Daddy's gone. 3 weeks before I learned that promises were just words adults used to buy time. I sat on that grocery store curb, 30 years old, successful by every external measure, and realized something that made my stomach turn. I had become him. Not in the leaving, I'd never leave, but in the exhaustion, in the promises I kept pushing to tomorrow, in the way my family looked at me when I said, not today. I'm tired. The archaeology had begun, and I wasn't ready for what it would unearth. You want to know what nobody tells you about chasing success? It's not the hustle that kills you. It's the numbness you develop to survive it. I had perfected the art of emotional anesthesia. Wake up at 5 a.m., numb. Check emails, numb. Disappoint my kids, numb. Fall asleep alone while my spouse watched TV in another room, numb. It was survival. It was necessary. It was slowly killing everything I claimed I was fighting for. But that moment in the grocery store cracked something open. And once the first crack appears, the whole dam starts to give way. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not unusual. Insomnia and I were old friends. But this was different. This wasn't the buzzing anxiety of unfinished tasks. This was something deeper. Something that felt like excavation. I found myself in the garage at 2 a.m., pulling out boxes I hadn't touched since our last move. Old photos, report cards, a Father's Day card I'd made in 2nd grade, crayon hearts and misspelled words. You're the bestest daddy in the whole world. The whole world. Even as a kid, I knew something about emptiness. They started surfacing in order, like some cruel slideshow orchestrated by a force I couldn't name. Age 7. Dad leaves. Mom works 3 jobs. I learned to make my own dinner and tell myself stories to fall asleep. Age 11. Try out for basketball. Coach says, you've got potential, kid, but you're not quite there yet. I never try out again. Age 14. First girlfriend breaks up with me. Says I'm too intense about my dreams. I learned to keep them quieter. Age 18. Don't get into my dream college. Counselor says, maybe aim more realistic. There's that word again, realistic. Age 22. First business fails. Partner says, I told you this wouldn't work. He takes the clients. I take the debt. Age 25. Wedding day. Beautiful. Perfect. Except for the empty chair where my father should have been. My wife squeezes my hand. She knows. She always knows. Age 27. First child born. I promise him everything. The moon, the stars, a father who shows up. I mean it. God, I mean it. But meaning it and doing it. Why is there always such a gap? Age 30. Here. Now. Sitting in a garage surrounded by the archaeological evidence of a life built on the fault line of not enough, not good enough, not strong enough, not healed enough. Each memory wasn't just a moment, it was a brick. And brick by brick, I had built a fortress around my heart so thick that even I couldn't get in anymore. But here's where the story gets strange. Here's where you might not believe me, and that's okay. I wouldn't have believed me either. As I sat in that garage, surrounded by the debris of my past, things started happening that I couldn't explain. First, it was the radio. I hadn't turned it on, but suddenly it was playing. Static at first, then clear as day. And we're back with our midnight program. Tonight's topic, when God feels silent, but he's actually working. I looked at the radio. It wasn't even plugged in. I unplugged it completely, took out the batteries. Silence. Then my phone lit up. 2:47 a.m. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Isaiah 43:2. Look it up. I almost deleted it. Probably spam. But something made me open my Bible app. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. Waters, rivers, drowning metaphors. How did they know? The next morning, exhausted and disoriented, I stumbled into my usual coffee shop. The barista, a kid I'd never seen before, handed me my usual order without me saying a word. Written on the cup in black Sharpie, "Your story isn't over." "Did you write this?" I asked. "Write what?" She looked at the cup, confused. "That's not my handwriting." You'd think these signs would have brought comfort. They didn't. They brought terror. Because if God was real, if he was actually trying to communicate, then that meant he'd been there all along, through every wound, every abandonment. Every night I cried myself to sleep as a 7-year-old boy, wondering why I wasn't enough to make my daddy stay. And if he was there, why didn't he stop it? The anger came in waves, not the hot kind that burns out quickly, the cold kind that settles in your bones and makes you question everything you thought you knew. I started arguing with the air, with the silence, with whatever or whoever was leaving these breadcrumbs. "You want to talk now?" I said to my empty car on my commute. 30 years of silence and now you want to chat? Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when he left? Where were you when I was building all these walls just to survive? Silence, but not the empty kind. The kind that feels full. Like someone is listening. Like someone is waiting for you to get it all out. A week later, my mother called. We talked every Sunday, but this was Thursday. Thursday calls meant something was wrong. "I found something," she said. "I was cleaning out the attic and I found something you need to see." An hour later, I was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a letter dated 3 months before I was born. My father's handwriting, addressed to me. "My son, I know you're a son, I can feel it. I'm writing this because I'm terrified. My father left when I was 7. His father left when he was 8. There's something broken in our bloodline, something that makes us run when we should stay. I promise you I'll be different. I promise I'll break this curse. I promise I'll teach you to ride your bike and throw a ball and be the kind of man who stays. But if you're reading this, it probably means I failed. It probably means the curse won. It probably means I became the very thing I swore I'd never be. Please be stronger than me. Please break what I couldn't break. Please end this cycle. I love you. Even if I'm not there, I love you." Dash Dad. The room spun. My mother was crying. I wasn't. I couldn't. I was too busy recognizing the handwriting, not just the letters, but the fear behind them. The same fear I felt every time I looked at my own children. The fear that I would fail them the way I had been failed. Generational trauma. That's what the counselors call it. But sitting there, holding that letter, I called it something else. A prophecy I was about to break. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to my son's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He was asleep, 7 years old, the same age I was when my world fell apart. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry for all the times I said, 'Not today.' I'm sorry for being too tired. I'm sorry for the curse I didn't know I was carrying." He stirred but didn't wake. His hand found mine in his sleep, holding on like that little boy in the grocery store. Like trust was that simple. And maybe it was. Maybe breaking generational curses wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about being present. Maybe it was about recognizing the wounds before they became weapons. I sat there until dawn, holding my son's hand, feeling something shift inside me. Not healing, not yet, but the beginning of it. The archaeology wasn't done. There were still layers to excavate, still bones to unearth. But for the first time, I wasn't digging alone. Someone was guiding the excavation, someone who knew exactly where every wound was buried and exactly why it needed to surface now. 3 days later, I was back at my desk. Same blinking cursor. Same unfinished dreams. But something was different. The weight wasn't as heavy. The silence wasn't as loud. That's when I noticed the email. It had been sitting in my inbox for a week, but I'd been too numb to see it. The subject line, "We've been watching your work." It was from a company I'd dreamed of working with for years, a door I'd knocked on so many times I'd lost count. They wanted to meet. They wanted to talk about a partnership that could change everything. But here's the thing about divine timing. It's never just about the opportunity. It's about whether you're ready to walk through the door. The old me would have jumped at it immediately, would have said yes to everything, would have sacrificed whatever it took. But I wasn't the old me anymore. I was someone in the middle of an excavation, someone learning that success without healing is just failure with a bigger paycheck. So I did something crazy. I replied, "I'm interested, but I need 2 weeks. I'm in the middle of something that can't be interrupted." I expected them to withdraw the offer. Instead, they replied, "We've waited this long. 2 more weeks won't hurt. Whatever you're working through, finish it. We want the whole version of you, not the partial one." As the days passed, the pattern became undeniable. Every time I faced a wound, really faced it, something would shift in my external world. It was like the universe, or God, or whatever you want to call it, was waiting for me to clean out the infection before pouring in the blessing. The gym bag I'd ignored for months. I opened it after confronting my fear of physical weakness, the fear that came from being the smallest kid after Dad left, the one who couldn't protect Mom from her tears. The first workout was horrible, the second was worse. But by the third, something ancient and strong started waking up in my body. The financial spreadsheets I'd been avoiding? I faced them after excavating my family's generational poverty mindset, the belief that we were not the kind of people who have money. The numbers were bad, really bad. But seeing them clearly was better than the fog of denial. And once I could see clearly, I could strategize. I could plan. I could climb. The conversation with my spouse I'd been postponing? I had it after unearthing my terror of emotional intimacy, the wall I'd built after learning that people who say they love you can leave without warning. The conversation was brutal. Tears, accusations, truth. But afterward, for the first time in years, we slept in the same bed. Not touching yet, but present. Both present. But the biggest excavation was yet to come. And it started with another memory, one I'd buried so deep I'd convinced myself it hadn't happened. I was 9, 2 years after Dad left. I was at a summer camp my mom somehow scraped together money for. Last night of camp, they did this thing where you could stand up and share what you were thankful for. I stood up. I don't know why. Maybe because I was tired of pretending everything was okay. Maybe because I needed someone, anyone, to see me. I'm thankful that I started, then stopped. The words wouldn't come. Because what was I thankful for? A dad who left? A mom who cried when she thought I was asleep? A life that felt like it was over before it began? I stood there, frozen, while 100 kids stared at me. The counselor started to stand to rescue me. But then something happened. An older kid, maybe 14, stood up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, "He's thankful that his story isn't over. He's thankful that chapter 1 isn't chapter done. He's thankful that God's not finished with him yet." I sat down shaking. The kid sat down too. I never got his name. Never saw him again. But his words had been living in me for 21 years, waiting for this moment, waiting for me to remember that even in my deepest wound, someone had been speaking life over me. That's when the phone rang. 11:47 p.m. unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I was too tired for another sales call, another disappointment. But something made me pick up. The voice on the other end said 7 words that made my blood run cold. 7 words that would force me to confront the one thing I'd been running from my entire life. We need to talk about your father. And just like that, I was about to enter the ring with God himself, whether I wanted to or not. Because sometimes the archaeology of wounds isn't just about digging up the past. Sometimes it's about discovering that the very thing you thought destroyed you was actually preparing you for a confrontation that would change everything. A confrontation that wouldn't happen in a church or a prayer closet. It would happen on a dark highway, with me screaming at the sky, finally angry enough to be honest with God. And apparently, he'd been waiting 30 years for me to get that angry. I hung up the phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I got in my car and drove. No destination, no plan. Just me, the darkness, and a conversation I couldn't avoid anymore. By the time I pulled over on that empty highway shoulder, I was screaming. Not at the caller, not at my father, at God. And for the first time in my life, I think he was actually waiting for me to get that angry. The voice on the phone had been my father's brother, an uncle I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. He'd tracked me down through social media, through old connections, through the kind of determination that only comes when someone's running out of time. Your father's dying, he'd said after those first 7 words. Pancreatic cancer, 3 weeks, maybe 4. He wants to see you. I'd hung up without responding. And now here I was, pulled over on Highway 49, hazard lights blinking in the darkness, screaming at a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. Is this your idea of timing? I shouted at the windshield. 30 years of silence and now this? Now when I'm finally starting to heal, you drop this bomb on me. The highway was empty. Just me and the occasional semi-truck passing by, probably wondering what kind of breakdown was happening in that car on the shoulder. They had no idea. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a wrestling match. I got out of the car. The night air was cold, sharp, good. I needed to feel something other than rage. You were there, I screamed at the sky. You were there when he left. You were there when I cried myself to sleep. You were there when Mom worked herself to exhaustion trying to be both parents. You were there and you did nothing. My voice echoed off the empty road and disappeared into the darkness. And now you want me to forgive him? Now you want me to rush to his bedside like some Hallmark movie? Where were you when I needed a father? Where were you when I was learning to shave from YouTube videos? Where were you at my wedding when I had no one to ask for advice? I was on my knees now, gravel digging into my skin through my jeans. I didn't care. The pain felt appropriate, necessary even. I've done everything right, I continued, my voice breaking. I stayed. I didn't run. I didn't abandon my family. I fought through the generational curse. I've been excavating every wound, facing every fear. What more do you want from me? Silence, but again, not empty silence. Expectant silence, like when a parent waits for a child to finish their tantrum before speaking. Answer me, I screamed. And then, in that silence, I heard it. Not a voice, not words, but something deeper. A knowing that rose up from somewhere I couldn't identify. You're not angry at me. You're angry at him. And you're angry at yourself for still caring. I collapsed forward, hands on the cold asphalt, because it was true. Under all that rage, buried beneath 30 years of carefully constructed indifference, was a 7-year-old boy who still wanted his daddy. I hate that I care, I whispered to the ground. I hate that hearing he's dying makes me feel anything at all. He chose to leave. He chose his absence. Why should his death matter to me? The tears came then. Not the controlled tears of adulthood, the ugly, snotty, gasping tears of a child. 30 years of them, apparently, had been waiting for this moment. I don't know how long I knelt there. Long enough for 3 truckers to slow down and check if I was okay. Long enough for my knees to go numb. Long enough for the anger to exhaust itself and leave only the truth behind. The truth was this. I'd been fighting God my entire life, thinking he was the enemy, when really he'd been the only one who stayed. When Dad left, who whispered, "You're going to be okay," in the darkness, When I failed my first business, who put that random book about resilience in my path at the bookstore? When I was ready to give up on my marriage, who sent that couple to our church who'd been through the same thing and survived? When I was drowning in the generational curse, who made sure that letter from my father surfaced at exactly the right moment? It was you, I said to the sky, my voice hoarse. It was always you. And in that moment, on that empty highway, I heard him, not audibly, but in that deep place where truth lives. I never left, not once. Every tear you cried, I caught. Every nightmare you had, I was there in the darkness with you. Every achievement you reached, I celebrated. Every time you chose to stay when everything in your bloodline told you to run, I was strengthening your feet. Your father's absence wasn't my plan. It was his choice. But I took that wound, and I've been turning it into something else, something powerful, something that would break chains not just for you, but for generations to come. But you can't complete the breaking while you're still in bondage to unforgiveness. I can't forgive him, I said. I don't know how. You don't have to know how. You just have to be willing. I'll do the rest. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, looked at my phone. 3:33 a.m. The same time from that night after the phone call about my father, the divine timestamp that kept appearing. God's little way of saying, yes, this is me. I got back in my car and looked in the rearview mirror. My face was a mess, red eyes, dirt on my cheeks from where I'd pressed my face to the ground. I looked like I'd been in a fight. I had been. And somehow, by losing, I'd won. Okay, I said to the reflection, to God, to myself. Okay, I'll go see him. But you're coming with me, because I can't do this alone. You were never alone. You just couldn't see me through the pain. The drive home was quiet, not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, the kind that makes you realize the storm was necessary to clear the air. When I got home, my wife was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. I heard you leave, she said, and somehow I knew you needed to go alone, but I also knew you'd need this when you got back. She'd been crying too. I could see it in the puffiness around her eyes. The uncle called here first, she admitted, before he called your cell. I gave him your number. I'm sorry if I shouldn't have. No, I interrupted. No, it was right. It was time. I sat down across from her, took the coffee and told her everything. The highway, the screaming, the wrestling, the voice that wasn't a voice, the knowing that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. I have to go see him, I said finally. I know. I don't want to. I know that too. What if I can't forgive him? What if I see him and all that anger comes back? She reached across the table and took my hand. Then you'll deal with it. With God, like you did tonight. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. What do you think will happen? I think you're going to see a broken man who's been running from his own father, wound his entire life. And I think you're going to realize that forgiveness isn't about him. It's about you being free. I stared at her. When did you get so wise? Sometime between watching you leave at midnight and making this coffee. She squeezed my hand. You're not going alone, you know. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm coming with you, she repeated. You've been fighting this generational curse alone for too long. It's time you remembered you have an army. The next morning, I did 3 things. First, I called the uncle back, told him we'd drive up in 2 days. Second, I called the company that had offered the partnership, told them I needed another week. They agreed without hesitation, almost like they'd been expecting it. Third, I went to my son's room, sat on his bed while he played with Legos, and told him a version of the truth. Daddy's daddy is sick, I said, and I need to go see him. Your daddy? He looked confused. You have a daddy? Everyone has a daddy. But I've never met him. I know. Is he a bad man? I thought about that for a long moment. No, he's just a hurt man. And hurt people sometimes hurt people. Are you hurt? I was. But not anymore. I'm healing. He went back to his Legos for a moment, then looked up. Will you come back? The question gutted me. Because of course that would be his fear. The same fear I'd carried. Yes, I said, pulling him into my lap. I will always come back. Always. Promise? Promise. Pinky promise? Pinky promise. He held out his tiny pinky, and I wrapped mine around it. Such a small gesture, such a massive covenant. That night I couldn't sleep again. But this time it wasn't from anger or anxiety. It was from something else. Anticipation, maybe, or preparation. I found myself reading scripture, not the feel-good verses everyone quotes, the wrestling ones, Jacob fighting the angel, Jesus in Gethsemane, Paul's thorn in the flesh, all the passages about God showing up not in the comfort, but in the conflict. And then I found it. Isaiah 43:18-19. Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. A new thing. Not a fixed thing. Not a restored thing. A new thing. Maybe that's what this was about. Not going backward to repair what was broken, but moving forward to create what never existed. A relationship with my father that we'd never had. Closure we'd never sought. Forgiveness we'd both needed but never knew how to ask for. The 2 days passed quickly and slowly at the same time. I worked out, harder than I had in months. Something about knowing I was about to face my father made me want to feel strong in my body. I organized finances, made lists, cleared my desk, external order to combat internal chaos. I also wrote him a letter, not to send, not even to give him, but to clarify my own thoughts, to figure out what I wanted to say if I got the chance, or if I could say anything at all. Dad, it felt strange to write that word. I'm angry. I've been angry for 30 years. You left when I needed you most, and that shaped everything about who I became, the good and the bad. But I'm tired of being angry. It's heavy. And I think maybe you're tired too. Tired of running. Tired of carrying whatever made you leave. I don't understand you. I might never understand you. But I'm coming to see you because I need to be free. And maybe somehow that will free you too. I can't promise forgiveness. I can't promise some movie moment where we hug and everything is okay. But I can promise to show up. Which is more than you did. But that's not the point anymore. The point is breaking the cycle. The point is my son never having to write a letter like this. See you soon. Your son. I never sent it, but writing it loosened something in my chest, made breathing easier. The morning we were supposed to leave, my phone rang. Unknown number. My heart stopped. Was he already gone? Had I waited too long? But it wasn't the uncle. It was a voice I didn't recognize. You don't know me, the man said, but I knew your father. Worked with him for 10 years after he left your family. I just heard he was sick, and I also heard you might be going to see him. How did you? Small world. Your uncle knows my wife. That's not important. What's important is that I tell you something before you see him. Okay. Your father talked about you every single day. Every single day. He carried your picture in his wallet, the one from your second grade school photo. He knew your birthday, your favorite color, your Little League batting average. He knew it all. Then why? Because he was convinced you were better off without him. His father was an alcoholic who beat him. His grandfather was worse. He left because he loved you, not because he didn't. He left because he was terrified of becoming what he came from. That's not an excuse. No, it's not. It's an explanation. There's a difference. I'm not calling to defend him. I'm calling to tell you that whatever you think you're going to find when you see him, you're wrong. You're not going to find a man who forgot you. You're going to find a man who's been haunted by you every day for 30 years. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in my hand, world spinning. Everything I thought I knew, everything I'd built my anger on was shifting. My wife found me like that, took the phone from my hand, led me to the car, started driving while I sat in the passenger seat, trying to reconcile 30 years of narrative with this new information. He thought about me every day, I said finally. Sounds like it. He left because he loved me. In his broken way, maybe. That doesn't make it okay. No, but it makes it human. We drove for 3 hours, through cities and towns, and finally into the mountains where he'd apparently been living. With each mile, I felt something shifting. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The beginning of understanding. What if I see him and feel nothing? I asked as we got closer. Then you feel nothing. What if I see him and feel everything? Then you feel everything. What if... Stop. She pulled over, turned to face me. Stop trying to control this. You've been trying to control everything your entire life because when you were 7, everything went out of control. But you can't control this. You can only show up and see what happens. She was right. She was always right about the things that mattered. Okay, I said. Okay. We pulled up to the address 20 minutes later. A small house, clean but tired looking, like it had been standing strong for too long and was ready to rest. Kind of like the man who answered the door. I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the giant of my childhood memories. This was a small, gray, hollow-eyed man who looked like he'd been carved out from the inside. But his eyes when he saw me. They filled with such a combination of joy and sorrow and regret and love, yes, love, that I couldn't breathe. Son, he said, and his voice broke on the word. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to turn around and leave. I wanted to make him feel what I'd felt. But looking at him, I realized he'd already felt it. Every day for 30 years, he'd felt it. Dad, I said. And then, because God has a sense of humor or timing or both, that's when my phone buzzed. A text from my son. Daddy, I found more Legos under my bed. Can we build something together when you come home? I showed my father the text, watched his face crumble. You have a son, he whispered. I have a son. And you stayed. I stayed. You broke it. The curse. You broke it. I'm trying to... He stepped aside to let us in, and I noticed his hands were shaking. The same shake from that morning with the coffee cup 30 years ago. Some things don't change, but some things do. Because as I walked into my father's house for the first time in my life, I heard that voice again. The one that wasn't a voice. The knowing that came from nowhere and everywhere. This is what victory looks like. Not the absence of wounds, but the courage to let them heal. Not the erasure of the past, but the redemption of it. Now, watch what I do with a willing heart. We sat in his small living room. My wife held my hand. My father sat across from us, looking like he wanted to speak but didn't know where to start, so I started. Tell me about your father, I said, and for the next 4 hours, he did. He told me about beatings and alcohol and poverty. He told me about running away at 16 and coming back at 17. He told me about meeting my mother and thinking he could be different. He told me about the night I was born and how holding me was the most beautiful and terrifying moment of his life. You were so perfect, he said, so small and perfect and trusting. And all I could think was how I was going to ruin you, how the poison in my bloodline was going to seep into you. And the more I loved you, the more terrified I became. So you left? So I left. I thought if I removed the poison, you'd be clean. I thought you'd be better without me. I wasn't. I know that now. But by the time I figured it out, it was too late. You were 8, then 10, then 15. And what was I going to say? Sorry, I missed everything. Can I come back now? Your mother had remarried. You had stability. I was the chaos you'd survived. My stepfather. A good man who'd raised me without ever trying to replace my father, who'd shown up to every game, every graduation, every moment. I'd been so focused on who left, I'd forgotten to fully appreciate who stayed. I wrote you letters, my father continued. Hundreds of them. Never sent them. They're in a box in the closet if you want them. Probably don't. They're just the ramblings of a coward. You're not a coward, I said, surprising myself. Cowards don't feel guilt. You're just broken. We're all broken. The difference is, some of us are trying to heal. He looked at me then, really looked at me. How did you become so wise? I had to. I had a son to raise. Tell me about him. So I did. I told him about my 7-year-old who loved Legos and dinosaurs and asked too many questions. I told him about the baby on the way, news I hadn't even shared with my wife yet, but somehow needed to tell my father. I told him about the nights I sat by their beds, terrified I was going to fail them. But you don't run, he said. No, I don't run, even when everything in me wants to. That's the curse breaking. That's you being stronger than all of us who came before. It's not strength, I said. It's God. He flinched at the word. God and I aren't on speaking terms. He's still speaking to you. You're just not listening. After what I've done? Especially after what you've done. My wife squeezed my hand. A signal. I knew what she was asking. And was I ready? I stood up, walked over to where my father sat, got on my knees in front of him, this small, dying man who'd been the giant monster in my nightmares for 30 years. Dad, I said, I forgive you. He broke. Completely. The kind of breaking that happens when 30 years of walls come down at once. You can't, he sobbed. You can't forgive me. I don't deserve. Nobody deserves forgiveness. That's what makes it grace. I thought I would feel different, lighter maybe, or triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. But not bad empty. Clean empty. Like a wound that had finally been drained of infection. We stayed for 3 more hours, looked at photos. He showed me the letters he'd never sent. I took them. My wife made tea. We talked about normal things and hard things and nothing things. When it was time to leave, he walked us to the door. He was tired. I could see it in the way he moved. The cancer was winning. Will you, he started, then stopped. Never mind. You've given me more than I had any right to ask for. What? I asked. I was going to ask if you'd bring him. Your son. Just once. So I could see that the curse really broke. But that's selfish. I looked at my wife. She nodded. We'll bring him, I said. Next weekend? Really? Really? What will you tell him about me? I thought about it. The truth. That you're his grandfather, that you made mistakes, that you're sick, that love is complicated and messy, and sometimes it looks like leaving and sometimes it looks like coming back. And if he asks why I left, then I'll tell him that sometimes people get so scared of their own brokenness that they run from the very things that could heal them. And that's why we don't run, no matter how scared we get. He nodded, reached out like he wanted to hug me, then pulled back. I stepped forward and pulled him into an embrace. He felt so small, so fragile, nothing like the giant who'd walked out of our house 30 years ago. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For breaking what I couldn't break, for becoming who I couldn't become. As we drove away, I watched him in the rearview mirror, standing in his doorway, watching us leave but knowing we'd come back, the opposite of 30 years ago. You okay? My wife asked. I don't know. I feel strange. Strange how? Like something just ended and something just began at the same time. Maybe that's what redemption feels like. We drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then my phone rang, the company with the partnership offer. I know you asked for another week, the voice said, but we've been discussing it, and we want to move forward now. Today. We don't want to wait anymore. Something tells us the timing is perfect. I looked at my wife. She smiled. Yes, I said, the timing is perfect. When I hung up, my wife was crying. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Don't you see? You couldn't receive the blessing until you released the burden. You couldn't step into the promise until you let go of the pain. She was right. The partnership, the breakthrough, the success I'd been chasing, it had been waiting for me to stop running from my past and turn to face it instead. That's when the phone rang. 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I was too tired for another sales call, another disappointment. But something made me pick up. Wait, number. That already happened. That was the call about my father. But here's what's strange. As I sat there in the car, heading home from seeing him, my phone showed 3:33 p.m., the divine timestamp. Again. And I realized something that made me pull over. What's wrong? My wife asked. Nothing's wrong. Everything's connecting. I grabbed my journal from the back seat, flipped through the pages. Every major moment, every breakthrough, every divine interruption, they all happened at times with repeating numbers. 11:11, 2:22, 3:33, 4:44. God's been marking the moments, I said, like timestamps on a video, showing me that none of this was random, it was all orchestrated. For what? For this. For breaking the curse, for showing me that he was there in every wound, working it for good, for preparing me to help others break free. My wife stared at me. You're going to tell this story, aren't you? All of it. I have to. Someone out there is sitting at their desk at 2 a.m., cursor blinking, wondering if God has abandoned them. Someone's little boy is waiting for a daddy who doesn't know how to come home. Someone's carrying a generational curse and doesn't know it can be broken. It's going to be hard, being that vulnerable. It's going to be freedom. For me and for them. When we got home, my son was waiting at the window. He ran out before we'd even parked. "Daddy, you came back. I told you I would." Always, always. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat at my desk. Same desk, same laptop, but no blinking cursor this time. This time, the words flowed like water breaking through a dam. I wrote about the leaving and the staying, the wounds and the healing, the curse and the breaking, the father who left and the father who never did. I wrote until the sun came up, until my fingers cramped, until the story was told. Not all of it, that would take longer. But enough. Enough for someone to read and think, if God was in his story, maybe he's in mine too. When I finally stopped typing, I noticed the time, 5:55 a.m., another divine timestamp. And then I heard it again. That voice that wasn't a voice, that knowing that came from everywhere and nowhere. Well done, good and faithful servant. You faced the giant, you wrestled the angel, you forgave the unforgivable. Now watch what I do with a surrendered life. This isn't the end of your story. This is just the beginning. The best is yet to come. When I finally stopped shaking, when the tears finally stopped coming, I noticed something impossible. The dashboard clock read 3:33 a.m. The exact time, down to the minute, of something that happened 20 years ago. Something I'd never told anyone. And that's when I realized he hadn't just been listening tonight. He'd been there all along. Every single moment I thought, they say hindsight is 20/20, but nobody tells you how much it hurts when God suddenly adjusts your prescription. When he shows you that every closed door, every rejection, every single failure wasn't him abandoning you, it was him protecting you from something you couldn't see. The next morning, I did something insane. I pulled out every journal, every photo, every rejection letter from the past decade, and I started looking for him, looking for his fingerprints in the wreckage. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about my story. It started with the journals, 14 of them, dating back to when I was 16. I'd kept them all, these chronicles of disappointment and dreams, tucked away in a box marked old stuff that I'd dragged through 7 moves and never opened. But now, sitting on my living room floor at 5 a.m. while my family slept, I spread them out like evidence in a cold case I was finally ready to solve. The case of where God was when my life was falling apart. The first entry that stopped me cold was from age 17, 1 year after my first real heartbreak. I'd applied for a scholarship to my dream college, the one where I was going to study business, make connections, become the success story that would prove my father wrong for leaving. The rejection letter had come on a Tuesday. I remembered because I'd skipped school Wednesday through Friday, telling my mom I was sick when really I was just broken. But here's what I'd written that I'd completely forgotten. Met a guy at the library today named Marcus. He saw me crying over the rejection letter and told me about community college, said his brother started there and now runs 3 companies, gave me his number, said God told him to talk to me. Weird guy, but maybe I'll call Marcus. I'd forgotten about Marcus entirely, but I had called him. And his brother had become my first mentor, the one who taught me everything about business that no classroom could, the one whose recommendation letter got me into a better university 2 years later as a transfer student, the one who introduced me to my wife at a business conference I had no business being at. Marcus, the random library stranger who said God told him to talk to me. If I'd gotten that scholarship, if I'd gone to my dream school at 18, none of that would have happened. I would have missed my entire life trying to catch a dream that was actually a detour. I kept reading, and the pattern became undeniable. Every single rejection, every closed door, every no that had felt like death at the time, they were all redirections. Divine GPS recalculating when I was heading toward a cliff I couldn't see. The job I didn't get at 23. The company went bankrupt 6 months later, and everyone lost their severance. The investment that fell through at 25. The partner ended up being investigated for fraud. The house we couldn't afford at 28. It was in the flood zone that got wiped out 2 years later. Even my father leaving, especially my father leaving, had protected me from something. From becoming someone who thought love was supposed to hurt, who thought abandonment was normal, who would have learned all the wrong lessons about manhood from a man who didn't know how to be one. But God didn't just protect through closed doors. He provided through opened windows I hadn't even noticed were there. Page after page, journal after journal, I found them. The coincidences that weren't coincidences, the random encounters that were precisely timed, the provision that showed up at the exact moment of need, not a day before or after. Like the time when we were 3 days from eviction and I'd written, "Don't know how we're going to make rent." Prayed for the first time in years, felt stupid talking to the ceiling. And then the next entry. Client I did work for 8 months ago just called. Said they found an error in their accounting and owed me exactly what we need for rent plus groceries. Check arrives tomorrow. I'd forgotten that. How do you forget something like that? How do you forget that God showed up with exact change when you were counting pennies? Or the entry from when my wife was pregnant with our first child and the doctor said there were complications. I'd written in shaking handwriting, "They don't know if the baby will make it. They don't know if she'll make it. I've never been so scared. If you're real, if you're there, please, please." And then, 3 pages later, doctor can't explain it. Says it's like everything just corrected itself overnight. Called it a miracle. Maybe it was. Maybe it was. Maybe. I wanted to reach back through time and shake myself. That wasn't a maybe. That was God saying, "I'm right here. I've always been right here." By the time I reached the journal from last year, the one that led up to that night with the blinking cursor, I was sobbing. Not from sadness, but from recognition. From finally seeing what had always been there. The protection, the provision, the presence, all of it hidden in plain sight, waiting for me to have eyes to see. But the journals were just the beginning. Next came the photos, and this is where the archaeology went deeper. Because pictures don't lie, even when our memories do. I found the album from my childhood, the one Mom had made before everything fell apart. There was the photo of my 7th birthday party, 2 weeks before Dad left. I'm blowing out candles, making a wish. I remembered that wish. I'd wished for a bicycle. What I'd forgotten was who was in the background of the photo, Mrs. Henderson from next door. She's smiling at me, not the camera. Mrs. Henderson, who, randomly, started inviting me over for cookies after school once Dad left. Who happened to need help with yard work every Saturday and paid me way too much for pulling weeds. Who, coincidentally, had a nephew my age who became my best friend through middle school. Who taught me to play chess, to think 3 moves ahead, to see patterns where others saw chaos. Mrs. Henderson, who I now realized wasn't just a nice neighbor. She was God's provision for a boy who needed someone to see him when his father couldn't. There were more, so many more. The coach who gave me extra time after practice, the teacher who slipped lunch money into my backpack when Mom was between jobs, the youth pastor who showed up at every single game, even though I wasn't particularly good and barely talked to him at church. All these people who'd stood in the gap, and I'd thought they were just being nice. But looking at their faces in these photos, I saw something else. Purpose, like they knew they were on assignment. Then I found the photo that stopped me cold. It was from summer camp, the one where the older kid had spoken over me when I couldn't speak. I'd forgotten we took a group photo that night. There I am, front row, eyes red from crying. But I'm scanning the back rows, looking for that kid who stood up for me, who prophesied over me without even knowing it. He's not there. I checked every face 3 times. He's not in the photo. I called my mom. It was too early, but I didn't care. "Mom, do you remember that summer camp when I was 9? The one where I had that breakdown during testimony time?" Of course, she said, instantly awake. Moms remember their children's pain even decades later. You came home different from that camp. Quieter, but somehow stronger. Do you remember an older kid, maybe 14, African American, tall, really kind eyes? Would have been a counselor or junior counselor? Long pause. Honey, that was an all-white church camp. There weren't any African American counselors or campers. I remember being uncomfortable about that, actually. The phone slipped from my hand, because I could see him. Even now, 30 years later, I could see him perfectly. His face, his voice, the way he put his hand on my shoulder and spoke destiny over my disaster. Who was he? What was he? I picked up the phone with shaking hands. Mom, I have to go. Are you okay? I'm figuring something out. I hung up and sat in the silence of my living room, surrounded by the evidence of a God who'd been there all along, including possibly sending someone who technically couldn't have been there. An angel? A vision? Does it matter? What matters is that in my lowest moment, when I couldn't speak for myself, heaven spoke for me. Through whoever or whatever that kid was. The rejection letters were next. I'd kept them all, some sick form of motivation or masochism. I'd never been sure which. 23 rejection letters from jobs, investors, publishers, partnerships. Each one had felt like confirmation that I wasn't enough, would never be enough. But now, reading them with new eyes, I saw something different. The investment rejection from 2018. While we're impressed with your vision, we've decided to pursue opportunities more aligned with our current portfolio. That company's portfolio. They had invested heavily in crypto right before the crash. If they'd taken my proposal, I'd have been tied to their sinking ship. The publisher rejection from 2019. Your manuscript shows promise, but we're looking for content that's more marketable to our existing audience. That publisher? They'd gone bankrupt during COVID. Meanwhile, the smaller publisher who accepted my work 6 months later had thrived and gave me complete creative control. The job rejection from 2020. We've selected a candidate whose experience better matches our immediate needs. That job would have required relocating across the country 2 weeks before lockdown started. I would have been trapped in a new city, isolated, while my wife was pregnant and needing support. Every single number had been God's protection. But here's where the divine archaeology got almost scary in its precision. I started mapping out the dates. When did each rejection come? What was happening in my life at that moment? What would I have missed if I'd gotten what I wanted? The pattern was surgical in its accuracy. Each rejection came exactly when accepting would have derailed something better, not approximately. Exactly. Down to the week, sometimes down to the day. I grabbed a piece of poster board and started creating a timeline. On top, I put the rejections, the failures, the closed doors. On the bottom, I put what happened instead, the doors that opened because the others had closed. The visual was staggering. It looked like a masterfully composed symphony, where every rest was as important as every note, where the silence created space for the perfect sound to emerge. My wife found me there at 8 a.m., surrounded by journals and photos and papers, staring at this timeline I'd created on our living room floor. She didn't say anything at first, just got coffee, came back, sat down beside me, and looked at the evidence of God's hand in our story. He was there the whole time, I whispered. Yes, even when Dad left. Especially when Dad left. But why couldn't I see it? Why did it feel so much like abandonment? She picked up one of the photos, our wedding day. Because pain is loud and love is quiet. Because rejection screams and protection whispers. Because when you're drowning, you can't always feel the hand pulling you to shore. You just feel the water in your lungs. She was right. The water had been so loud, I couldn't hear the lifeguard diving in after me. Look at this, I said, showing her a journal entry from 3 years ago. Remember when we thought we were going to lose the house? She nodded. That had been our darkest financial period. Everything had dried up at once. Clients disappeared, deals fell through, savings depleted. We'd been 48 hours from foreclosure when a check arrived from a client I'd worked with 5 years earlier. They'd been auditing their books and found they'd underpaid me. The amount was exact, to the penny, what we needed to keep the house and buy groceries for a month. I wrote it off as luck, I said. Called it a coincidence. How did I not see God in that? Because you were too focused on the 48 hours of fear to see the 5 years of preparation. God had that money waiting for exactly when you'd need it. He planted it 5 years in advance, knowing that client would find it at exactly the right moment. 5 years in advance. The thought made my head spin. If God had been working 5 years ahead for that one provision, what else had he been setting up? What was he setting up right now that I wouldn't see for another 5 years? I pulled out my laptop and started a new document. At the top, I wrote, "The Archaeology Report, Evidence of God in the Ruins." And then I started cataloging everything, every protection, every provision, every divine interruption, every moment heaven had touched earth in my story. By noon, I had 15 pages, single-spaced, and I wasn't even done. The more I looked, the more I found. It was like those magic eye pictures where once you see the hidden image, you can't unsee it. God hadn't just been present in my story. He'd been the author of it. But then I got to the recent events, my father, the reconciliation, the forgiveness, and I realized something that made me close the laptop and go for a walk. If God had been orchestrating everything, if he'd been working all things together for good, then that meant my father leaving had been part of the plan. Not God's perfect will. He doesn't will abandonment or pain, but his permissive will. He'd allowed it, knowing he could redeem it, knowing that my wound would become my testimony, that my breaking would become my making. I walked for 2 hours, wrestling with this thought. If God could use even my father's abandonment for good, what couldn't he use? What pain was unredeemable? What wound was too deep for him to heal and repurpose? When I got home, there was a message on my phone. From my father. His voice was weak but clear. "Son, I just wanted you to know. After you left, I started reading those journals you mentioned, the ones about God being in the story. And I realized something. The day I left wasn't random. It was the same day my father left me, 23 years earlier. Same date, same time of year. I didn't plan it, didn't even realize it until now. But it's like there was this generational calendar of abandonment, and I just followed it without thinking. But you broke the pattern. You stayed. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that. Maybe God was even in my leaving, preparing you to be the one who would finally stay." I played the message 3 times. The same date, 23 years apart, generational patterns playing out with mathematical precision until I, had broken the equation. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went back to every person I could find who'd been part of my story. Mrs. Henderson was still alive, 93 and sharp as ever. The youth pastor was retired, but remembered me instantly. My first mentor, Marcus's brother, was running 5 companies now instead of 3. One by one, I called or visited them. "Why did you help me?" I asked each one. The answers were eerily similar. "Mrs. Henderson, I woke up one morning with you on my heart. Couldn't shake it. God kept saying, 'That boy needs someone to see him.' So I did." The youth pastor, "I felt called to show up for you. Didn't know why, you barely talked to me, but God said, 'Be there,' so I was there." The mentor, "Marcus came home and said he met a kid at the library who needed help, said God practically shouted at him to talk to you. We don't ignore when God shouts." Every single one of them had been prompted, moved, called, not by me or my need, but by something bigger. Someone bigger. They'd been God's hands and feet when I couldn't see him or feel him myself. But the conversation that broke me completely was with my high school English teacher, Miss Rodriguez. She was retired now, living in a small apartment filled with books and photos of former students. "I've been waiting for you to call," she said when she heard my voice. "What? How did you know I would?" "Because God told me 30 years ago that one day you'd come back to ask why I did what I did, and that when you did, I should tell you the truth." "What truth?" "Your essays, the ones about pain and abandonment and looking for meaning. I didn't just read them. I prayed over every single one. I knew you were wrestling with something bigger than teenage angst. You were wrestling with God." And I knew that one day you'd win that wrestle, but not before it blessed you with a limp. A limp? Like Jacob. He wrestled with God and won, but he walked with a limp forever after. A reminder of the fight, your wound, your father leaving, that's your limp. But it's also your testimony. It's the thing that qualifies you to speak to others who are limping. I sat in my car after leaving her apartment, sobbing. Not from sadness, but from overwhelm. The intricacy of it all, the intentionality, the careful construction of a story I'd thought was random chaos but was actually orchestrated redemption. That night, I sat down with my son. He was building with Legos, creating something elaborate that only made sense to him. I watched him work, thinking about all the pieces of my story that had seemed random but were actually part of God's elaborate construction. "Dad, why are you staring at me?" he asked without looking up. Just thinking about how sometimes things that look like they don't fit together actually make something beautiful when you see the whole picture. He held up his creation. To me, it looked like random blocks stuck together. "It's you," he said. "Me?" "Yeah? See? This part is when you're sad." He pointed to a dark section. "This part is when you're happy. A bright yellow section. This part is when you work. A structured, repetitive section. And this part," he pointed to a small red piece in the center, "is your heart. It's little, but it holds everything together. 7 years old and preaching better than any pastor I'd ever heard." "You want to know something?" I said. "You're right. That's exactly what I look like. All those different parts held together by something small but strong in the center." "God?" he asked with the simple clarity of childhood faith. "Yeah, buddy. God." That night, after everyone was asleep, I went back to my timeline on the living room floor. But this time, I added a third row. The bottom row. The one I'd been afraid to acknowledge. The people I'd helped because of my wound. The marriages I'd been able to speak into because I understood abandonment. The teenagers I'd mentored because I knew what it was like to feel fatherless. The business partners I'd counseled through failure because I'd been there. The men I'd challenged to stay when everything in them wanted to run because I knew the cost of leaving. The third row was longer than the other two combined. My wound hadn't just been for my healing. It had been for others' healing too. Every scar I carried was a map for someone else's journey out of darkness. Every tear I'd cried had watered someone else's hope. Every prayer I'd screamed at God had loosened someone else's chains. I thought about Jesus' wounds, how even after resurrection, he kept the scars. Thomas needed to see them, touch them, to believe. Maybe that's why we keep our scars too. Not for us, but for all the Thomases who need to touch proof that resurrection is possible. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "You don't know me, but I heard your story through a friend." I'm sitting in my car at 2 a.m., trying to decide if I should go home or just keep driving. My kids are asleep. They don't know I'm gone. I've been telling myself they'd be better off without me, just like my dad told himself. But hearing that you broke the pattern, maybe I can too. I'm going home. Thank you. I stared at the text. I hadn't even shared the story publicly yet, just with a few people. But already it was working. Already the wound was becoming medicine. I texted back, "Go home. Stay. Fight for them. Fight for yourself. Break the curse. You're stronger than you know, and God is closer than you think." 3 dots appeared, showing he was typing. Then, "How do you know God is close?" "I can't feel him." I looked at my timeline on the floor, at the evidence of a God who'd been weaving grace through every moment of my story, especially the broken ones. Because he was close when I couldn't feel him. He was working when I thought he was absent. He was writing my story when I thought I was writing it alone. Pull out some photos, some journals, anything from your past. Look for him in the background. I promise you'll find him. He's been there all along. Okay, I'll try. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank the God who made sure our stories would intersect at exactly this moment. Your 2 a.m. breakdown is his 2 a.m. breakthrough. The dots appeared again. Then, 2:22 a.m. actually. Does that mean something? I laughed out loud. Of course it was 2:22. Of course God was still leaving his timestamps. "Yeah," I typed. "It means he sees you. He's with you, and your story isn't over. I put the phone down and looked at the clock. 3:33 a.m. again. Always. The divine timestamp that had marked every major moment of this journey. And that's when I heard it. Not the voice that wasn't a voice. This time, it was almost audible, like someone standing right behind me. Now you see. Every thread was intentional. Every pain had purpose. Every loss led to a greater finding. You thought you were abandoned, but you were being prepared. You thought you were forgotten, but you were being forged. You thought your story was random, but it was being written by the author of all stories. And now, your story will help others find me in theirs. I fell to my knees right there in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of God's faithfulness. Not a wrestling this time, a surrender, a worship, a recognition that I'd been walking on holy ground my whole life and just hadn't known it. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for being there when I couldn't see you. Thank you for the closed doors that were protection. Thank you for the rejections that were redirections. Thank you for the wound that became my witness. Thank you for breaking what I couldn't break and using me to break it for others." The room felt full, like heaven was leaning in, like all of history had led to this moment of recognition and surrender. But here's where the story takes a turn I never saw coming. Because finding God's fingerprints in my past was one thing. What happened next, what he asked me to do with all that pain, that's what terrified me. 3 weeks later, I got another phone call. But this time, it wasn't about my past. It was about someone else's future, someone who was sitting exactly where I'd been that night with the blinking cursor. And God whispered, "Now you know why I saved you." It wasn't just for you. The coffee shop was crowded, but I spotted him immediately. 23 years old, laptop open, staring at a blank screen with the same exhausted desperation I knew too well. His shoulders carried the weight of dreams that felt too heavy. His eyes held the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I knew because God had already told me his story, not in detail, but in essence. Father issues, generational patterns, blinking cursor, the same song, different verse. And I was about to show him that his story was still being written and the author had never left his side. But that's getting ahead of myself. Because before I could help him find God in his story, I had one more piece of my own archaeology to complete, one more wound to excavate, one more divine fingerprint to discover. And it would change everything I thought I knew about that night my father left. The coffee shop was crowded, but I spotted him immediately, shoulders slumped, staring at his laptop screen with that same exhausted desperation I knew too well. He didn't know me, didn't know I was watching, didn't know that God had sent me there for him. 6 months earlier, I would have walked past. But now I knew what it felt like to be pulled from the edge. Now I knew that breakthroughs don't always look like success. Sometimes they look like scars that become someone else's roadmap home. I ordered 2 coffees, black. The way you drink it when you're too tired to care about cream and sugar. The way I'd been drinking it that night with the blinking cursor. Walking over to his table felt like stepping through time, like approaching my younger self with everything I wished someone had told me. "This seat taken?" I asked. He looked up, confused. The shop was half empty. There were plenty of other seats. But something in my eyes must have told him this wasn't about seating. "No, go ahead," he said, his voice carrying that hollow tone of someone who's been screaming internally for so long they've gone quiet. I sat down, slid the extra coffee across to him. "You look like you could use this." "Do I know you?" he asked, suspicious but too exhausted to really care. "No, but I know that look. The one that says you're about 3 keystrokes away from giving up on whatever dream is dying on that screen." His fingers tightened on his laptop. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Business plan, I guessed? Or maybe a proposal? Something that was supposed to change everything but now feels like it's just confirming what you've always suspected, that you're not enough." His eyes widened. "Are you a therapist or something?" "No, I'm just someone who sat where you're sitting, who stared at the same blank screen, who carried the same weight, and who nearly made the same mistake you're about to make." "Which is quitting before the miracle?" He laughed, but it was bitter. Sharp. The laugh of someone who's been disappointed too many times to believe in miracles anymore. There's no miracle coming, man. I've been at this for 3 years. 3 years of rejection, 3 years of almost but not quite. 3 years of watching everyone else succeed while I'm still here, still stuck, still failing. 3 years. The same amount of time I'd been in the wilderness before that night with the cursor. The divine timing wasn't lost on me. God doesn't waste anything, not even our timelines of suffering. Can I tell you something? I said. And if after I'm done you want me to leave, I'll leave. But I think you need to hear this. He shrugged. What did he have to lose? When you're at rock bottom, even strangers with coffee become possibilities for hope. So I told him, not all of it. We didn't have that kind of time. But enough. I told him about the cursor and the exhaustion, about the generational curse and the wrestling with God, about my father's abandonment and my father's presence, about the divine archaeology that revealed God's fingerprints on every wound. But mostly, I told him about the breakthrough, how it didn't come when I was striving but when I was surrendering, how it didn't arrive through my strength but through my scars, how success, real success, the kind that matters, wasn't about what I achieved, but about who I became in the achieving. He listened without interrupting. His coffee grew cold, his laptop screen went dark, but his eyes came alive, like someone was adjusting the dimmer switch on a light that had nearly gone out. So you're saying God's been there? He asked when I finished. In all of it? Even in the rejection? Especially in the rejection. Every no is God's protection from a lesser yes. Every closed door is Him keeping you from a room that would become a prison. Every delay is Him aligning things you can't see yet. But how do you know? How can you be sure it's God and not just random pain? I pulled out my phone, showed him the timestamp, 4:44 p.m. Because God leaves fingerprints. Look for the patterns, the coincidences that aren't coincidences, the provision that shows up at the exact moment of need, the people who appear right when you're about to break, like me showing up here today. He stared at the timestamp, then at his own phone, 4:44 p.m. That's impossible or intentional. You get to choose which story you believe. His hands were shaking now, that tremor that comes when truth starts cracking through the walls we've built around our hearts. My dad left when I was 8, he said suddenly. Haven't talked to him in 15 years. Last week he called, out of nowhere, said he was sorry, said he wanted to make things right. I hung up on him. The parallel was so precise, it took my breath away. And now you're sitting here, about to leave your own dreams, about to abandon what you've been building, about to continue the pattern. I'm not like him. No, you're not. But generational curses don't always look the same. Sometimes fathers abandon families. Sometimes sons abandon dreams. Sometimes we leave people. Sometimes we leave purposes. But it's all the same spirit of running when we should be staying. He was crying now. Not the pretty tears of movies, but the ugly, necessary tears of breakthrough. The kind that wash away years of accumulated pain and make space for something new to grow. I don't know how to stay, he admitted. Everything in me wants to run, to quit, to just disappear. I know. That's the curse talking. But you know what's louder than curses? Blessings. And I'm here to speak blessing over you. To tell you what someone told me when I was 9 years old and couldn't speak for myself. Your story isn't over. Chapter 1 isn't chapter done. God's not finished with you yet. He looked at me like I'd just handed him oxygen when he'd been drowning. You really believe that? I don't believe it. I know it. Because I'm living proof. Because my son is living proof. Because every broken chain becomes evidence that the next one can break too. I reached into my bag and pulled out a book. My book. The one I'd written in the months after the reconciliation with my father. The one that told the whole story. Every wound, every scar, every fingerprint of God in the wreckage. I'd been carrying it, waiting for God to show me who needed it. Now I knew. Read this, I said, sliding it across the table. And when you get to the part about the night with the cursor, remember that the man who wrote that is sitting across from you now, living proof that your breakthrough is closer than you think. He picked up the book, read the title. When God Writes Your Story, Finding Heaven's Fingerprints in Hell's Valleys. "This is really you?" he asked. "That's really me. Every messy, broken, redeemed piece of me. And if God can turn my cursor into a testament, he can turn yours into a testimony." We sat there for another hour. I helped him with his business plan. Turned out it was brilliant, just needed fresh eyes. We talked about fathers and Father God, about curses and blessings, about staying when everything in you wants to run. When it was time to leave, he stood up and did something I didn't expect. He hugged me. Right there in the coffee shop, this stranger who'd become a brother hugged me like I'd just pulled him from a burning building. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. For stopping. For caring. Don't thank me. Thank the God who orchestrated this whole thing. Who knew you'd be here at 4:44 p.m. on a Tuesday? Who knew I'd walk in at exactly the right moment? Who's been writing your story since before you were born and isn't about to stop now?" As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Headed into surgery. They're going to try to buy me more time. Wanted you to know I love you, and I'm proud of who you became in spite of me. Or maybe because of me. Maybe God uses even our failures for his glory." I texted back, "He does, Dad. He absolutely does. I'll be there when you wake up. I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. The curse was broken. The pattern was shattered. I was a man who stayed. But the story doesn't end there. Because that young man in the coffee shop, his name was David. Like the shepherd boy who became a king. Like the one who faced giants with stones and faith. And 6 months later, he called me with news that confirmed everything I'd told him about God's timing. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice electric with excitement. "Remember that business plan you helped me with? The one I almost gave up on? An investor just offered 3 times what I was asking for. 3 times. And you know what time the call came in? 4:44 p.m. Of course it did, because God loves his timestamps, loves leaving evidence that he's in the details, not just the big picture. But that's not even the biggest news, David continued. I called my father. We met. We talked. We cried. We're going to try to rebuild, slowly, carefully, but we're going to try. And I'm mentoring a kid now, teenager who reminds me of myself, angry at God, angry at his absent father, angry at everything. I'm showing him what you showed me, that God's been there all along. The multiplication had begun. The wound had become medicine, had become healing, had become testimony, had become legacy. One broken chain breaking another, until whole family lines were free. Over the next year, I watched David's transformation with awe. He didn't just succeed in business. Anyone can make money. He succeeded in breaking every generational pattern that had tried to claim him. He married a woman who'd been told she'd never be loved right because her father had wounded her too deeply. Together, they became proof that wounds don't disqualify you from love. They qualify you for a deeper kind of healing. They had a son. They named him Samuel, God hears. Because they wanted him to know from birth that his cries would never go unheard, his prayers would never hit the ceiling, his father would never disappear into the night. But here's what really got me. David started a foundation, called it Cursor to Calling. It helped young entrepreneurs who were about to give up, who were staring at their own blank screens and blinking cursors. He'd find them in coffee shops, co-working spaces, libraries, always at divine timestamps, always with 2 coffees, always with the same message: your breakthrough is closer than you think. Within 2 years, he'd helped launch 37 businesses. 37 dreams that almost died were now thriving. 37 families that almost stayed in poverty were now building generational wealth. 37 testimonies of God's faithfulness in the valley. And every single one of them could trace their breakthrough back to that moment in a coffee shop when a stranger interrupted their surrender with hope. My father lived to see it all. The cancer that was supposed to take him in 3 weeks held off for 3 years, long enough to meet his grandson, long enough to see the curse fully broken, long enough to witness what God could do with surrendered wounds. The last conversation we had before he passed was on a Tuesday, 3:33 p.m. He was in hospice, barely conscious, but suddenly his eyes opened clear and focused. I see it now, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. See what, Dad? The whole story. How my leaving led to your staying. How my wound became your strength. How God used even my greatest failure for His greatest glory. I thought I was ruining your story, but I was just writing the first chapter of your testimony. Dad, no, let me finish. I need to say this. I spent 30 years hating myself for leaving, but watching you, watching what you'd become, watching the chains break and the blessings flow. Maybe God knew. Maybe He knew you needed a wound deep enough to create a testimony powerful enough to free generations. Maybe my leaving was never about me at all. It was about what God was going to do through you. He was crying. I was crying. The nurse was crying. The whole room felt thin, like heaven was pressing close, ready to receive him. I forgive you, Dad, I said again, even though I'd already said it 100 times. I know. But more importantly, you helped me forgive myself. And that's the real miracle. He died that night, peacefully. Surrounded by family he'd thought he'd never have again. The man who'd run away died having been caught by grace. At his funeral, David spoke. He'd never met my father in person, but he knew his story, knew how the wound had become the healing. I stand here today, David said, as living proof that one man's worst mistake can become God's greatest miracle. The man in this casket left his son when he was 7. That wound could have destroyed everything. Instead, it became the very thing God used to save my life, and 36 others, and counting. He paused, looked at me. Your father's abandonment became your testimony. Your testimony became my salvation. My salvation became others' freedom. The curse didn't just break, it reversed. What the enemy meant for destruction, God used for multiplication. After the funeral, I found one more thing in my father's belongings, a journal he'd kept the last 3 years of his life. Every entry was a prayer for me, for my children, for David, for everyone. The testimony was touching. 3 years of daily intercession from a man who'd been absent for 30. The last entry, dated the day before he died, simply said, "Thank you, God, for not giving up on me. Thank you for using my worst moment for your best purposes. Thank you for my son who became the father I couldn't be. The curse is broken. The blessing is flowing. It is finished, but really, it's just beginning." It's been 5 years since that night on the highway when I wrestled with God. 5 years since the archaeology began. 5 years since I discovered that God had been writing my story all along, using even the broken sentences to create a beautiful paragraph. The company partnership that was waiting for my healing. It led to a business that now employs over 200 people, many of them carrying their own father wounds, their own generational curses, their own blinking cursors. We don't just offer jobs, we offer healing. Every Friday at 3:33 p.m., we stop everything and share testimonies. We call it Fingerprint Friday, a time to identify where God showed up in our week. My son is 12 now. He knows the whole story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. The ugly, beautiful, broken, redeemed truth of it all. And you know what he said when I finished telling him? So my grandfather's leaving was actually part of God's plan to save all those people. Not God's perfect plan, I corrected, but God's redemptive plan. He took what was meant for evil and used it for good. Like Joseph in the Bible. Exactly like Joseph. Dad, do you think my wounds will become someone else's healing too? The question stopped me cold. Because of course he would have wounds. We all do. Living in a broken world guarantees it. But now I could answer him with certainty. Yes, I said, your wounds will become healing. Your scars will become someone's map home. Your broken places will become someone's breakthrough. That's what God does. He's in the business of redemption, and redemption always multiplies. Even if I mess up really bad, like Grandpa did, especially if you mess up really bad, those make the best testimonies. He thought about that for a moment. Then, I want to write a book one day about how God uses broken things. Will you help me? Of course. We could call it the Fingerprint Files, evidence of God in everything. 12 years old and already seeing the divine patterns. The curse wasn't just broken, it was reversed. Where there had been abandonment, now there was presence. Where there had been running, now there was staying. Where there had been silence, now there was testimony. Last week I got a call that brought everything full circle. It was from a publisher. They wanted to turn my story into a documentary. They wanted to follow the thread from my father's leaving to David's foundation to the hundreds of lives that had been changed. We want to call it Cursor to Calling when God writes your story, they said. Why? I asked. Because everyone has a blinking cursor moment. Everyone has that place where they want to give up, and everyone needs to know that God is still writing even when we think the story is over. I agreed, but with one condition. David had to be co-producer. The wound and the healing together, telling the story of redemption. The documentary aired 6 months later. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of emails from people saying, "This is my story too." Thousands of cursors becoming callings, thousands of wounds becoming testimonies. But the email that undid me was from a woman named Sarah. She wrote, "I was sexually abused by my father from age 5 to 15. I've spent 20 years in therapy trying to heal. Nothing worked. I was planning to end my life, had the pills, had the plan. Then I saw your documentary. When you said, every wound becomes someone else's healing, something broke in me, or maybe something broke free. I realized my wound wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my testimony. I'm now counseling other survivors. We meet every week at, you're not going to believe this, 4:44 p.m. God's timestamp, right? My father stole my innocence, but he couldn't steal my purpose. The wound is becoming medicine. Thank you for showing me that God wastes nothing, not even our deepest pain." I read that email to my son. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, what if every bad thing that happens is just God setting up a bigger testimony? What if he's always playing the long game?" "I think you're right," I said. "I think God sees the end from the beginning. He knows how he's going to use every wound, every scar, every broken place. We just have to trust the author, even when we can't see the whole story. Especially when we can't see the whole story. That's what faith is, trusting the author when you're still in the middle of the chapter." That night, I sat at my desk. Same desk where I'd stared at the blinking cursor 5 years ago. But now, instead of emptiness, there was overflow. Instead of exhaustion, there was purpose. Instead of questions, there was testimony. I opened my laptop and started typing. "Dear whoever needs to hear this, your breakthrough is closer than you think. I know you're tired. I know you're wondering if God has forgotten you. I know the cursor is blinking and the page is blank and everything in you wants to quit. But don't. Not yet. Not when heaven is about to move. You're not reading this by accident. This is your divine timestamp. This is your 4:44 moment. This is God saying, I've been here all along, working in the shadows, preparing your testimony. Your wound is not your end. It's your beginning. Your failure is not your finale. It's your foundation. Your curse is not your conclusion. It's about to become your calling. So stay, fight, believe. Even when you can't feel him, he's there. Even when you can't see him, he's working. Even when you can't hear him, he's speaking. Your story isn't over. Chapter 1 isn't chapter done. God's not finished with you yet. And someday, maybe in a coffee shop at 4:44 p.m., you'll be the one walking up to someone else's blinking cursor with 2 coffees and a testimony that says, your breakthrough is closer than you think. The curse is breaking. The blessing is flowing. The author is still writing. And the best chapters are yet to come. Hold on. Someone who's been where you are. I hit send, posting it to the blog that had grown from my testimony. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Within days, millions. The wound had become medicine, had become healing, had become epidemic, an epidemic of hope spreading faster than despair ever could. My phone rang. David. Did you see what time it is? He asked. I looked. 11:11 p.m. New timestamp, he said. New season. God's not done with us yet. No, I agreed. He's just getting started. And that's the truth I leave you with. Whatever wound you're carrying, whatever cursor's blinking, whatever giant you're facing, God's not done with you yet. He's just getting started. Your breakdown is about to become your breakthrough. Your test is about to become your testimony. Your mess is about to become your message. But first, you have to stay. You have to fight. You have to believe that the author of your story knows what he's doing, even when you can't read the next line. Your breakthrough is closer than you think. Don't give up now, not when heaven is about to move. That young man in the coffee shop, he's thriving now. Not because I gave him a magic formula or a success strategy, but because I told him the same thing I'm telling you right now. The thing God whispered to me in my darkest moment, the truth that changed everything. Your breakthrough isn't just coming, it's already here. It's been here all along. You just couldn't see it through the tears. But now you can. So if tonight you're wondering if you can keep going, if tomorrow you'll wake up to the same blinking cursor and unopened dreams, hear this. Your breakthrough is closer than your next breath, closer than your next tear, closer than the whisper you're about to hear if you just listen. Don't give up now. Not when heaven is holding its breath, waiting to show you what's been building in the shadows of your suffering. The same God who carried me will carry you. May his strength be your rest, his whisper be your guide, and his promise be your anchor until the harvest arrives, and it will arrive. That's not wishful thinking. That's a promise from the God who's been writing your comeback story since before you ever fell. Every wound is becoming medicine. Every scar is becoming a story. Every curse is becoming a calling. Every breakdown is becoming a breakthrough. And you're becoming everything God dreamed you'd be when he first thought of you. Your story isn't over. The author is still writing. And the best chapters, they're not behind you. They're waiting for you. Right on the other side of I can't is he can. Right on the other side of it's over is it's just beginning. Right on the other side of that blinking cursor is your calling. Hold on, stay, fight, and believe. Your breakthrough is closer than you think. Amen.